Good morning, or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever you're listening to this or watching it. Hello to everyone that's listening. Hello to everyone who's walking their dog, driving their car, or hello to everyone who wanted to see us today. Thank you for joining the Housing Sector Podcast. Today, I am talking with Siobhan, and Siobhan has 20 years background. She's got lots going on there inside and outside the housing sector. She has, and I've got some notes made here, an insight into data, culture, leadership, and governance. That's the focus of what we'll be talking on today. And it was really Grenfell, wasn't it, that decided to bring you more into in line with the housing association world. Is that right, Siobhan?
Yeah, it was actually, Ben. I joined just after Grenfell, having a successful background and career in change management and leadership in local government and policing. I joined the sector 2017 and wanted to use the skills and knowledge that I'd acquired to help make a difference. Also, I was raised in a council house in North Manchester, so I'm really, really passionate about the sector, and about providing affordable homes and the importance of providing affordable homes in strong and safe communities.
And the part in local government, local councils, that was obviously, I should imagine, one of their biggest expenditures and probably where you would spend most of your day focused on. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. The work that I did within local authorities was very much about the introduction of contact centres, corporate contact centres. So it was back in the day, 2005, where the e-government agenda came in, and that was really about embracing the internet and improving access to services for every member, for all citizens, all residents, all businesses. The aspiration in terms of data was very much about having a single view of your customers. Because as you know, working in the local authority, that can be quite siloed, there's different views of everything. And the idea of that agenda was to bring everything together in one coherent way. Now, whether they succeeded, I don't
Well,
think local
well,
authorities are still there yet.
that's what I was going to bring on to, because I mean, someone of my age, you say 2005, and you think, well, that was only a few years back. Actually, no, it wasn't. It was 21 years ago. And yeah, at that point, even then, the focus was we need to have clean data that we can readily reference. Otherwise, it's useless. And I had a conversation. Someone messaged me the other day, oh, Ben, AI, it's going to as we always hear, it's going to revolutionize all the housing association world. And I think, yeah, you're right. It is going to, but you have to have a clean pot of data that you can draw from, that you can trust, because everything you build subsequently on that, if that
Yeah.
first block isn't pure, it's going to crumble. And here we are
Exactly.
now. I don't think councils have got it, and I certainly have anecdotal of a lot of housing associations that don't. But I also know that my housing association, they do not have pure, clean, ready available data. Am I right or am I wrong?
I think it's a big challenge across the sector. And just going back to local authorities, when I joined the sector, it was like walking into an environment which was 10 years behind local government in terms of the
As they
state of
usually
play with
are. Yeah.
digital technologies. Where we are at the moment, and you touched on it, Ben, it's recognised as one of the key risks for the sector. And, as a result of Grenfell, the Social Housing Act came into force. And what the regulator is looking for is evidence of compliance. And that in itself is tricky because what we have in the sector, and this is based, just based on my experience and based on the insights that I've gathered from my peers, is that we have got significant data sprawl. And this probably goes back to a performance culture as well, where it's quite siloed, So you have a director of repairs, a director of assets, and they all are chasing targets in terms of those KPIs and chase the target but miss the point. So back to the customer experience, that end-to-end journey is something that is a real challenge. And what we have is data that is sprawled all over multiple systems, multiple applications, we have a culture where some of these systems are not fit for purpose, you know? Um, and if you are in a contact centre, if you are a colleague in a contact centre and you are navigating 5 screens when you are on with a customer, that in itself is a problem, you know? What we should have is a single view of our customers and a single view of our properties as well. And that is the challenge in the sector because we do have, we have this sprawl of data. We have multiple systems. One of my standard jokes about the sector is sometimes in organisations in housing, there are more platforms than Elvis Presley. Um, and what we should be doing, Ben, moving forward is actually, in terms of the governance of boards and executive teams, is to try and consolidate that data, into one place ideally, which will drive down costs. It will improve efficiency, but it will also improve the productivity of our colleagues as well, so that they can resolve, you know, um, problems at the first point of contact, but also help. Technology should be an enabler. It should enable us to get things right. And that in itself is a problem because what we've got is, you know, systems in place that don't speak together, are not integrated. And we've also got a culture of data where it's perceived that data is actually something that is the IT team's problem. Actually, what we need to drive forward, Ben, is a data culture across social housing. Data is everyone's business, and that data is an absolute key asset, and it's something that is going to drive better outcomes for tenants, for customers, but it's going to improve the efficiency of the organisation as well.
Okay, I want to come back to the customer journey because that's a very important part. I just want to go back now. What, 8, 9 years ago, we had the GDPR regulation come in, and I was part of a team who had to make sure that all our sales guys, all their data, we had to reach out and say, "Are you still interested in our product? Can we keep your information on file?" And if we got no reply, or they said they didn't want to, we had to remove all their data as a legal requirement from our systems. Now, if I'm a housing association, I'm going to find it and my own housing association struggle to find my name. It was replicated multiple times on different systems as it would be. And with mergers, this is often the problem. We've got different, as you say, data silos, people working from different spreadsheets and different end users. But if I wanted to be clear that everything we obliged to the GDPR regulations and we had deleted unnecessary data, how can we do that?
Yeah, it is a key challenge, and I go back to the sector risk profile about data quality. Um, it's a big issue, Ben. It is a big issue because of the plethora of systems that have been procured. It poses so many challenges. In terms of GDPR, we have what is probably a lot of what we call rot data. Yeah, where it's data that is redundant, obsolete, and trivial. So back to GDPR, we are, we're not complying with GDPR. Um,
I was just trying to find the fines there online, and they're probably quite high. But for a housing association, God knows what that would be. And also, as a resident, it's my data. My data could be easily hacked. I'm assuming again, with so much going on across so many different areas, they're probably not as secure as they should be, and therefore not able to protect data, which is why the ICO have to get involved. So again, it's a
yeah,
further threat to the housing associations.
yeah. Yeah. Now, I would hope, that housing associations, have resident DPO to provide that kind of data governance and to guide the organisation. But what has really kind of, I suppose, brought this to a headline in terms of GDPR and compliance with GDPR is the use of AI, and it's a challenge because we're dealing with some of the most vulnerable people in society in terms of some tenants, and the data that we have has got to be accurate. We've got to be using that in line with the GDPR principles, the data protection principles, of which there are 7. And unfortunately, and I don't think this is just symptomatic of the sector, I think this is across public sector, but we have so much data, and it is, again, keeping on track, making sure that, there's a culture in place where we've got data retention, that the data that we gather about our tenants is accurate, that we've got consents from our tenants as well, and that it's stored in the right place and it is being used for the purpose for which it is collected. And that is a real big challenge, within the sector. It's acknowledged. So what I would say, Ben, is what is absolutely key is this data culture, where data again has to be something that is everyone, it's everybody's business. And maybe if executive teams, had policies in place whereby, there was a data amnesty, that every Friday afternoon or whenever it was, that every member of staff has, allocated time to clean up the data that they have. That would help, because, it's not a one-off process. We've got to keep that data up to date. What is an opportunity is self-service. Customer self-service, where our customers can actually review the data that we hold about them and update that accordingly. That is a real opportunity. But yeah, I'm just going to, be, in terms of my experience, it is a big challenge for the sector. We're looking at compliance and we're looking at the regulator, but the powers of the ICO, I think it's 4% of annual turnover. And just going on to data breaches, Ben, can you imagine a scenario now in a contact center, and if you are navigating 5 screens because there's data in 5 different places and it's not integrated, there's no CRM in place, customer relationship management, it's a big problem, because what that scenario presents is an elevated risk of human error. And 95% of data breaches are down to human error. And like I say, if you are navigating all these different systems, and there isn't that single version of the truth, and the data on a tenant isn't aligned to what it's saying on this application, it's a big problem. It's a big problem.
Okay, so we've got bad data, and that's bad for the customers because they don't know who I am, and it's bad for the customer service guys because they don't know who I am. Again, they don't know what's been reported, what's happening, interrupts that journey. But now let's put about how much it must be costing in time and energy and potentially money when it comes to collating information related to service charges. How do we know that they're accurately charging? And we've heard horror stories of it, where buildings are being charged for a lift that they don't have, concierge services that they don't have, because housing associations don't seem to know what's going on in each building. And I'm assuming, again, that's a data issue. They've inherited the data through a merger. They've not been out and visited the building, or if they have, it was someone years ago. So they don't actually know the property, the state of the property and communal areas. They don't know how much work is going to be needed to carry out. And then they've got to somehow charge the tenants successfully and appropriately. What's going on there? How much disruption does it cause in the back rooms?
Again, it goes back to data governance, Ben, whereby some of the decision making is actually based on, more instinct than it is on insight, and there is a gap. And that's what I'm really passionate about, is about building those foundations to make decision making better. Now, what is going to be very powerful is the stairs, which is coming in, which is the equivalent of freedom of information in terms of local authorities, because that is going to enforce transparency and accountability, whereby tenants can ask exactly these questions, and that is going to demand reliable data to provide the right answers. But totally take on board, Ben, your point, because again, it goes back to that issue of data not being in one place, conflicting data about the same thing, about the same building, perhaps saying different things. We have a culture of spreadsheets within the sector. We've got thousands of spreadsheets. Again, that is another risk. We've got too many versions of the truth. But just back to the
Tony
fundamentally
Smith,
to
the
your problem, to the question that you're asking, I would say that the issue is about a lack of insight, data insight, and that needs quality data. In systems that are usable. And ideally, what we should be doing, Ben, is capturing that information once, right, accurately, and using it many times. And unfortunately, that isn't the scenario. Um, and that's just based on my experience. I don't want to do a disservice to other housing associations who are doing a great job. But again, this is based on the insights that I have gathered from peers, having led data events on behalf of women in social housing. It is a real challenge.
So groups like Women in Social Housing are aware of it. You've obviously brought it to the boards of corporations where you've worked. Are we at a point where we're just burying our heads in the sand and hoping that the problem goes away? Or I leave that over to the next CEO whenever they come in. It's something we need to review. It's something we need to consider. Or is there anyone that's actively going, right, let's stop, let's rebuild? Because all they ever seem to do is buy another bit of software which sits on top again, which then still has the same problem, which is this root cause of bad data. So have we seen any signs of people within the sector going, actually, I've got a smart idea of how we're going to fix this, and here's how we're going to do it. Here's how week one looks.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really good question. What I would advocate is that the sector needs to turn that dirty data tap off by exactly doing what you've talked about, and maybe there's a role here for the regulator as well. The regulator is doing the inspections. They are gathering evidence themselves in terms of, what does it look like to be a really good housing association? Should we not be learning from those housing associations that have got a C4 in terms of how good is their data? And I think that is a challenge within the sector as well, Ben, is there's there's more opportunities around collaboration. Why are we all going out and doing separate digital and data strategies? Why don't we come together and collaborate and apply the lessons learned of a housing association that has procured big platforms, implemented it, and are now decommissioning those platforms? Let's stop making the same mistakes over and over, but it takes a very strong CEO to actually to take that decision, and the board as well. So in terms of the role of the board, one of the challenges that I've experienced is about assurances. So when we're looking at data and we're looking at, is our data reliable? Is it accurate? What are the real critical risks? I think boards need to actually, look at their internal assurances, but not depend upon that internal assurance. Okay. I think they need that independent, impartial assurance. Now, there's usually 3 lines of assurance in terms of good governance, as you know, Ben. Internal assurance, which is usually your teams, your managers. Then you've got internal audit, which usually are accountants. Now, I would argue accountants are not data experts. Yeah. So if you are, if you have an internal audit undertaken by accountants, I would challenge the validity of that. Yeah. And then the third line of defense or assurance is external audit. So that is really where you're going out and you're getting, a third party. So again, if you're looking at data, to get a third party, independent, impartial data specialist to come and look at your systems, how data is stored, what is being collected, how it's being collected, to give you that to give boards that assurance of where they are. And I mean, what I've done, Ben, based on my own experience, um, is I've looked at the consumer standards and I have designed a data maturity model, yeah, based on the delivery of the consumer standards. Because it's a difficult one, because when we talk about data, there's a natural kind of reaction from a board and a CEO to say, oh, that's the director of IT, or it's the CIO. But we really need boards and the executive teams to own data and understand. So back to what I've done. Based on the insights that I've gathered over the years, I've developed a data maturity model for the sector, and it uses a narrative that is meaningful, that can be understood, and goes back to business health and compliance for boards. So what I've tried to do is mitigate the risk of what usually happens, and this is why probably some housing associations are in the situation that they're in, is because it goes back to, the IT director to make decisions, when actually this decision making needs to come from the board and from the executive team. So back to that data maturity, level 1 is high risk. So this is whereby, for example, you've got, your data quality is impaired. You haven't got a culture of ownership of data across the organisation. You've got multiple systems and applications that are not integrated, and that is high risk. The dream state is level 5, and that is sector leading. So this is everything's lined up. Your ducks are lined up. Your culture is good. Your board get it. Your exec are hands on with it, and this is sector leading. This is embracing AI. And as a board, having the confidence that the data that is feeding your AI, your rent sense, or, your predictive analytics on repairs, that data is credible, and that is sector leading. Now, when I've tested this model on quite a few housing associations, quite a few are coming out at level 2, which I've called firefighting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a move up from level 1, which is high risk of getting, a C4. The worst outcome in terms of the consumer standards, through to getting, sector leading, and being able to actually work in that world when we're talking about community outcomes, working with our partners much better. Having worked in the police, Ben, I know firsthand that, when you're talking around things like community safety partnerships, the police are very strong, obviously, on data, because it's intelligence, it solves crimes, and you have to have the data sharing agreements in place. But the police were very, very, based on my experience, the police were very wary of partners using systems if their own data wasn't good quality. So
Yeah,
again, going back
absolutely.
to what we're trying to achieve in terms of neighbourhood outcomes, if we are wanting to work with the NHS, with police, with local authorities, and using, our data and sharing systems, that data has got to be absolutely spot on. Does
I
that
think
make
part of the problem
sense?
is it makes sense to me perfectly. I'm trying to bring it in so other people understand it who haven't had so much time in the data world. It was always viewed as something unsexy, wasn't it? As soon as you brought up data in a senior leadership meeting, 80% would start checking their laptops and their phones, and you'd see them unengaged. But actually, as a nerd, data, it's all very sexy and very exciting because you can learn so much. When I brought in that GDPR, I remember going back to my sales guys and saying, right, we've got to clear out all our data. And there was a rebellion. We can't do that, Ben. All my contacts, all this. And I said, hang on a minute, guys. All we need to do is send them an email to see if they're still engaged. And let's see how many conversations we can get out of that email that you're going to send them. And we wrote 3 or 4 versions for them to send out. And the leads went through the roof for 3 months because it was people we hadn't touched, we hadn't been in contact with for so long. Look, let's move away from data. I think it's a big conversation. I think it's a big problem. And to give you one anecdotal bit of information. My housing ombudsman complaint many years ago, part of it was their inability to track their own records. And when my landlord appealed this, they said to the housing office, "We don't think it's fair that you've said we can't maintain our records, that we can't keep track of our records." And the housing ombudsman came back and said, "There are 6 or 7 examples within your things where you said you can't find the data." Good grief. Okay, look, the other thing we want to talk about today is because you've had an input into sort of skills, performance, and transparency. Let's explore that a little bit in the remaining time that we have. I haven't led you in with a question there. So you've put, you're part of the transformation. You want to bring in a new culture, new processes, and
Yeah.
the transformation. How does that start day one when you come into a company, a
Do
housing
you know what?
association?
It starts it starts again with whatever your business strategy is. Um, what I've seen, based on my experience, have one strategy, which is your business strategy. Yeah, that everyone understands, signs up to. You've got a meaningful vision with outcomes that people are very clear what you're about. Then that performance framework to support the delivery of those outcomes. Prioritize it. What is important? Compliance is absolutely a must have, in
Now,
terms
look,
of decent home standards.
I hear what you're saying, Siobhan, but I have to say, yeah, but all of this is just words. I mean, these strategies change every 18 months. They just tweak them slightly, and it's our new corporate strategy. How do we embed the right one? How do we make sure it's not just words and that everyone buys in, from residents down to the key workers that we've got within our business? How do we get that buy-in?
Yeah. So it's about consultation, it's about listening, to what our customers say, the insights that we are gathering from complaints. Let's learn from those. What are the fundamental, issues for our housing association? Coming from customer insights, you know, also listening to the insights that your frontline teams are providing as well. They're the eyes and the ears of the organisation. Let's learn from those. So again, it's that evidence, whether it's, both qualitative, the insights that are coming from customers, or quantitative through the data that you have got on your complaint system, using that as an evidence base to actually shape your strategy. And then in terms of that vision and defining what that vision is, driving ownership across the organization, so having a very good approach to kind of your change management, and that's got to come from the top, having a very clear narrative from your chief exec, from your executive team, and then having that accountability, down from your chief exec to directors to heads of service, right down to the front line. And the delivery of those outcomes and that business strategy goes back to an individual level. So linking your appraisal system, your performance reviews back in. How are you delivering those outcomes? What are the kind of
Okay.
key performance indicators that you're delivering to enable this housing association to deliver its ambitions? Does that make
Okay. Look,
sense?
yeah, it makes sense in theory. This is the Housing Sector Podcast. This is Ben Jenkins, and we talk honestly about housing. If I am a CEO, first of all, I don't want to know the stock of most of most of the properties within my portfolio, because I can't afford to manage them. I can't afford to keep them, and I can't afford those problems. If I've got bad data, I don't need to know about it. That's IT, that sits over there. If I've got customers who are complaining, I'm going to keep that at the middle management level, because I don't want to know about that. As soon as I know about it, it's something I've got to action. What I am going to do is I'm going to put on a few road shows, and I'm going to put them on in the middle of the day when most people are at work. And I'm going to get some photos and some PDFs put out, and I'm going to say how well we're doing. But in all honesty, as long as I'm taking the money, I don't really care. Is that fair? Because that's going to protect me as a CEO. Is that fair? Siobhan, we love what you're saying. We're going to do all of this. Yeah. And then I go back to my office and I go, no, keep it as. I want emails blocked. I want customer complaints kept at that level, and I want bad data kept in that department, and I want my head of governance to manage anything that the ICO throws at them. I want no part in it because I need to be portrayed as a success, and I need to be that so I can get funding and money. Have I called it?
Yes. So again, this goes back to culture, Ben, doesn't it? We need a culture where, that people can speak up freely. They know what the issues are. We need to look at value for money. Again, goes back for me, it goes back to leadership and it goes back to governance. It's not about covering up. It's about understanding the problems that you have, getting to the root causes of those problems. So let's deep dive into IT here. And let's look at efficiency. Let's look at productivity. Let's look actually the mental health of some of the staff that are having to support all these applications who could say that they're not resourced effectively. Let's look at all that. Let's look at the business case for change. Okay. Let's turn that dirty data tap off. Okay. And let's stop going out and procuring more systems. Look at what we've got and sweat the assets that we have got. If it's not working, take corrective action. But there's a lot of capability in the housing management solutions that are across the sector. Are they configured right? It is a challenge. So for me, it goes back to business case management, being more commercially minded. And you've touched on something that I feel very strongly about accountability, Ben, and not I am so committed to the Nolan principles in public sector, and I think that most people or everyone that works in social housing, they care. They work in the sector. This is what I'd like to believe. They work in this sector because they genuinely care. Yeah. Um, but we should have a culture where we are holding each other to account, and there is a culture of active listening and challenge and having that growth mindset. Now, when we look at things like recruitment, diversity is what we should be advocating as well. And unfortunately, within the sector there is quite a lot of appointments based on favoritism, perhaps.
Oh, it's
you
very
know
lot of
um,
nepotism going on.
yeah, and if you appoint based on agreeing with you, I don't think that's a good thing, because I think a good thing in terms of business health is to have that kind of active challenge in a very respectful way. But challenge it. Why are we doing this? What is the root cause of this problem? So in terms of IT, have we actually looked at what we called TOC, total cost of ownership? It's significant. If we look at the spend on all these IT systems that we have, the support of these IT systems and maintenance of these IT systems, and what is the impact on the customer and on the financial health of the organisation. So it goes back to business case management. Let's actually look at what is the data, what is the evidence telling us. Let's look at costs. Let's look at experience. Let's look at our complaints of our customers, and let's actually champion the customer voice by having greater representation of the customer. In involving them in the change programs that are being led by the executive team.
I think the customer, and as a customer, I'm probably, I'm one of the few exceptions, is that we do push back, and we do want to, and the impact this has had on my life and my earnings doing things like this, and my support site for Green Square Cord residents. There are a few of us, and we tend to be, as this week's blogs, vexatious. We're labelled as vexatious and pushed away because we're trouble. We're saying things we don't want to hear. We'll throw legal action at you. We'll get you arrested. All of this nonsense. And I think the people who step up onto these customer panels are you know, they start off well, but they realize they're not being heard and they're more token. They become what I call tokenistic tenants who say the right things, who get pushed back, but they throw them a little bit of money and they go, oh, this is lovely, and I'm on the board of this and I'm on the customer panel of that. It's not real engagement. It's tokenistic. And I think as long as we're doing that, we talk about the voice of the customer. What you need to be doing is talking to the likes of Shaq. You need to be talking to people like myself and the other groups who have stand up. There are some very vocal tenants on social media who are saying things. They don't dress it up nicely. They don't pull their punches. They don't always use correct punctuation, but those comments are there. And what ends up happening is they're blocked and they're villainized. They're pushed away as vexatious. And this is the problem. Real engagement isn't going to be pleasant, which is why the CEOs and the Housing Association don't actually want it. So they talk about customer panels and they bring in these tokenistic, which leads nowhere. It just reinforces the same idea that we're doing great, we're all noble, we're all doing it for the right thing. It doesn't fix the problems. And that, I'm afraid, Siobhan, is my downplaying ending for today's call. I hope you'll come back and we can reconsider, but it's been insightful talking to you and learning a bit more about the insights of data and how it should be managed. I think we're a long way away from there, but let's end on a positive. If you were to sit in front of the CEO today and you've got 2 minutes, what are you going to tell him? Her.
Sorry, Ben, say that again because you just broke up on the.
Okay, you've got 2 minutes in front of the
Yeah.
CEO to talk about why data is important, and we don't want any buzzwords. What is the core impact? What is the big impact on residents when the housing association has bad data?
Okay, my key message would be that data is so important. When data is unreliable and fragmented, culture is reactive. And this is, based on your experience, Ben, of which you share, and rightly so, we have a culture that is reactive. And when culture is reactive instead of proactive, governance relies on assumptions rather than on evidence. And that is key. And when governance isn't grounded in insight, well, then social housing providers are going to continue to struggle to understand root causes or to actually make sustainable, meaningful change and improvement. So the role of a CIO is absolutely critical, and it's great to see that more and more housing associations are appointed a CIO because it needs to be at the top table with the chief executive. Do not delegate it to an IT manager. This is a really, really important agenda. It's about compliance. It's about delivering better services to tenants. It's about being accountable. It's being about and transparent, but it's also about, delivering the best value for money that you can deliver as a housing association. So your data is so important. Get it right first time.
Get it right. My message would be take your head out your ass, roll up your sleeves and get down within the trenches and find out what's really going on amongst your housing stock. All right, Siobhan, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you very much indeed. Stay strong. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Ben.
There we go.